This is an Urbinary interview. Urbinary. The podcast exploring how we understand and live urban spaces. Joining us today is Gloria Calderone, an architect by training with a PhD from the University of Florence. Gloria's research delves into the fascinating intersection of performing arts, public spaces, and urban life, exploring how bodily experiences influence people's perception of public spaces, the meanings and values they attribute to them. Her research employs qualitative methods and participant observation and provides deep insights into these dynamics. Currently, Gloria is a research fellow at the University of Palermo, where she is conducting studies on inner areas and their unique challenges. We first met Gloria at the ESOP Young Academics Conference 2024, where she presented her work on bodily and synesthetic experiences in urban spaces. Her presentation struck us as highly relevant, and we invited her to join this episode because her expertise and sensitivity to the role of the body offer a critical perspective for understanding our positionality as observers of urban spaces. So you described the aim of your research as to see if and how people's perception of public spaces changes due to the possibility for their bodies to experience the city in a synesthetic way, to refer to performing arts as a tool for regenerating urban spaces and strengthening the sense of community. Could you explain this idea more clearly? What do you mean by experiencing the city in a synesthetic way, and how do performing arts contribute to urban regeneration and community building?
Okay, yeah. Well, before going direct to the answer, I just want to spend a few words on why I needed to, and I wanted to refer to synesthetic experiences of space. So where the reasons of this research question come from, I think it is necessary to give some context on the condition we experience in the contemporary city. These conditions deal with anesthetization or neutralization of senses. I think that bodies in the contemporary city lives kind of a double condition. On the one hand, bodies are overstimulated, right? We are always overstimulated, and bodies are stunned. I think this is a strategy to stupefy us and make us consume. So it is a strategy to serve the logic of the market and the capital. We can think to our city centers or touristic centers, for example, right? All the time we're stimulated by advertisement, signs, super powerful colors, and so on. But this is a very superficial way of feeling because, right, we are overstimulated, so all the time we are a new input. And on the other hand, the bodily experience in the contemporary city is somehow anesthetized. It can appear a contradiction. We are anesthetized by the speed and the rhythms of life inducted by the socioeconomic system, or our bodies are anesthetized by the consensual nature of urban projects, or again by the spectacular and consumerist strategies of urban capitalism. So what is important here is that urban design also supports and contributes to this condition of body overstimulation on the one hand and anesthetization on the other. Let's do a very simple example. If we think about how much the olfactory landscape of cities, the olfactory landscape has changed over the centuries, even for good reasons, of course, hygiene regulations, etc. But still, the olfactory landscape of the contemporary cities is very more aseptic and neutral than that of the past. For example, we use non-odorous plants, we use materials that are perfectly washable, and so on. And I don't want to say that urban design is not interested in aesthetical results. On the contrary, it stimulates the sense of sight because it is looking for beautiful and attractive scenarios. But it stimulates the sense of sight. That is another topic, but it deals with visual imperialism. What about the other senses? So my question was, what if we reclaim all the other senses in our urban experience? And synesthetic experiences are experiences of the city that involve all the senses, not just sight, not just hearing, that are, let's say, the only senses that the Western culture accepted and legitimized. But rather, synesthetic experiences deal with first and foremost touch and smell, with haptic experiences as a way of assessing environments and their atmospheres. So, in my opinion, one possible alternative to the impoverishment of sensibility in urban practice needs the reappropriation of the whole bodily experience. And for synesthetic experience, so I refer to multisensory, but actually I would prefer to speak about kinesthetic experiences. The idea to refer to performing arts actually, for me, comes from the consideration that we as urban designers or scholars in urban studies are not educated, are not taught to using our bodies as tools of investigation, as method to design or studying spaces. Other disciplines did it before, like sociology, geography, anthropology, but not urban design and not urban studies. So I wanted to refer to performing arts basically for three reasons that are the familiarity with the body that we don't have. Performing arts, of course, work with bodies. They are absolutely familiar with bodily issues and perception. A second reason is that they also work in relation with spaces. Let's think about site-specific performances. And the third reason is that also performing arts work with citizens, with non-professional performers within participatory frameworks. What I had the opportunity, just to answer to your question, to notice thanks to the case studies and research experiences is that when we refer to performative and artistic performative practices within urban design or urban regeneration processes, people get to know spaces in another way. Like they acquire a new learning of spaces and a kind of augmented knowledge, augmented awareness of spaces. And secondly, this kind of augmented experience, of embodied experience, make them to attribute new meanings, new qualities. They are in long processes. They let people to build relationships, so they can be useful for community building and community strengthening. So I don't want to say that performing arts can regenerate spaces alone. No, this is not what I'm saying. But yeah, they can contribute to the regeneration of spaces. Unity building, of course, there are three important conditions or preconditions of the regeneration of places. So maybe we can hybridize our technical tools with the artistic ones to get closer or to get another and more sensitive knowledge of spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. We go for the second question. You mentioned thinking of performers' bodies as subjects that expand the possibilities for reading and writing the city. The body, in this sense, is not only an object of design, but also an active agent in the creation of urban spaces. So we like to ask you if you can elaborate on this dual role of the body and how it influences the way we understand and interact with cities.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to clarify that when I say performers' bodies, I do not just mean professional performers' bodies, but everyone can be a performer. Citizens involved in participatory processes, for example, users of spaces can be performers, and definitely also the urban designer can be a performer. Indeed, I like a lot the idea of the urban designer as a performer that Francesco Carelli suggested to me. And I also like to think to urban designers as choreographers, as Lawrence Halpern used to say.
But yeah, why do I make this difference between body as an object of design of cities and body as a subject of design of cities? Well, because in the common practice of urban design, designers approach these spaces in a very rational way, and they study spaces normally from a distance, far from places. So bodies commonly are barely involved into the design process. Design is most of the time an intellectual process. And it is not resulting from an embodied experience. In this sense, in the traditional ways of urban design, the body is not the subject, okay? But yes, the body is always the object of every project of space. It is always the recipient. Because at the end of the day, when urban designers project a space, they are designing experiences of space. And every experience of space is an experience of bodies in space. Every experience. And this is crucial to me. And that's why, as scholars or designers, should not avoid to consider bodies and direct experience in our work. Of course, I do believe that the traditional tools of urbanism, like analysis and cartography and statistic data, are necessary. But without an embodied experience of spaces, we could not comprehend and understand an incredible variety of information that constitutes spaces but are not readable from a distance, from above. For example, feeling the comfort or discomfort condition of a street, the traffic conditions, the fluxes, the informal uses that are present in a space, or the forms of negotiation of space, the forms of control, and so on. You need to be down below, as Deserto said, to feel all this, to capture all this kind of informations. And so being only when bodies are down here into the city can grasp this information and can reuse them to rewrite the city. And this is important because experiencing the space is the condition to design it, and not vice versa, as traditional design does. Mm-hmm. When I say that, so in this case, when the body, we are over here to study or to feel the space, we become subject. When I say writing the city, I use this word in two different ways. The first is that when we use the space, feeling it, observing it, like attentively, using all our senses, or doing performances like, for example, also walking or doing the reads, dancing, and so on, we are rewriting spaces because we are using them in a different way. We are acting our right to the city. Maybe we are expressing a form of resistance to the imposed and formalized uses, or simply we are attributing new qualities to the space. So somehow we are writing them again in a new form. But also, I also intend the word writing the city, because starting from that reading, we can use the informations that we captured and we grasp to design, to make a new design of spaces, right? And sometimes, if our processes allow us, we can also do it performing the design itself with our bodies. I conducted or studied some experiences in this way, and all the analyses were done by our bodies, and then we performed the design with our hands, with our feet, and so on. So when I say to write cities with our bodies, I also mean this, like starting from the information we received and we read from our bodies.
I'd like to ask you, in your research you discuss the concept of bodygraphy, memories written by the body, to describe the interaction between the body and space. You suggest that the body can be a central tool to gain knowledge about emotions, environmental perception, and sensory experiences, as you already explained. So can you explain this concept a bit further and guide us on how, in practice, we can use the body as a tool for observing and understanding urban space?
Yeah, the concept of bodygraphy actually comes from the studies of Paola Bernstein-Jacques and Fabiana Dutra-Britto. Paola is a professor of urban planning, and Fabiana a professor of dance at Federal University of Bahia. They work together. They actually stress a lot this relation between space and body, and the fact that they co-depend and co-evolve. So according to them, the body interact with the city and with urban conditions, and by doing this, the body incorporates urban conditions, recording a sort of cartography, a synthesis. That is the bodygraphy. So it's actually the experience of all of us. We incorporate spatiality, we incorporate people, buildings, atmospheres, situation. We have these memories within us, and in this precise moment that I am talking to you, my cities are in conversation with your cities, let's say. So, yeah, my body include your body, our bodies include within themselves a space that is simultaneously internal and external. This is important to know, because to understand that our experience is always filtered by our backgrounds, by our cultural conditions, and so on. I was talking to a friend of mine recently. He is Brazilian, and we were discussing the fact that when he sees a narrow street with a few people, he feels fear. On the contrary, I feel that can be a very intimate environment, and probably I am going to like it. So knowing all this, we can be open to consider that our perceptions form part of the knowledge of the cities, and this legitimizes us to consider these aspects. We can do it by simply walking. For example, walking methods are absolutely important to get to know cities, urban drifts, or dancing as well, or sitting and staying there and observing is a very, very useful way to practice this and to analyze spaces by an embodied perspective. Also, another way to understand sensations and feelings can be, for example, body mapping storytelling, that it is a very powerful method of qualitative research. And all these instruments let us to understand a lot of aspects that are inherent to cities and that are not readable from above, from cartography. For example, levels of violence that are inscribed into the space, or injustice levels, and so on.
You argue that scholars should invert their gaze, questioning their own position of privilege and their relationships with research subjects. However, this raises the question of where we, as researchers, should position ourselves. Should our own perceptions and experiences be part of how we analyze urban spaces? And if so, how can we do this responsibly and inclusively?
We cannot only deal with the bodies of others. As a scholar, I must consider not only other people, citizens, users' bodies, but also my body. You, as a scholar, should consider your body. We should train us to feel, first of all, from the only point of view that we have at the end of the day, that is our body. On my opinion, if we can do this, if we can train us to feel, it is already revolutionary. But it is not enough, of course, because unlike the users that we involve in our researchers or in the performative and kinesthetic practices, we have a greater responsibility, and we cannot ignore that what we feel is linked to the repertoire we possess and embody. Absolutely, we should reflect on the fact that on the position we occupy each time, and our position may have to do with condition of privilege or of marginalization, as the case may be. And this position profoundly affects both how we see space and how we are seen in the space that we study, and in the way we are seen by others who are there. Because our position can imply power inequalities, can imply colonial hierarchies, prejudice linked to prior knowledge, and the whole social-cultural repertoire that we carry with us and that form the filters through which we read cities. Also, gender or racial issues are, of course, part of this positioning. A short excursus, it is not a coincidence, for example, that in my professional experience, I figured out the importance to consider my body pretty late during the years of my PhD. I was all the time talking about bodies, knowing spaces through the body, making urban studies more sensible, closer to the somatic, etc., etc. But in fact, I was disregarding my body. And I believe that this comes from, of course, very rooted distrust that we all have in giving credence to subjective information, especially for the purpose of scientific knowledge. But I also believe that this has to do with gender issues, with my precise position, and with a sort of epistemic vulnerability, let's say, that forms a distrust in the recognition and legitimation of our feminine cognitive authority. Especially when the feminine authority wants to assess knowledge through ways that are alternative to the masculine ones. So through routes like this one, like different to those of pure reason, logic, dissociated from the body. But to answer your question, the question was, should our own perceptions and experiences be part of how we analyze urban spaces? Yes, I think they should. I think researchers should deal with their bodies' insights, let's call them this way, deal with information that we get from perception. Because as I said, these allow us to grasp aspects that we could not grasp from a distance through disembodied and objective analysis. But then we should also invert the gaze, indeed. So from the studied object to the studying subject. That means that we have to invert the gaze on ourselves and question, our perceptions and experience, considering from which position we got them. In my case, the position of an adult woman, female, cisgender, white, able-bodied, and so on. All conditions that affect me in my interpretation, but also affect the way I am received from others, right? While I'm in the field, because it influences reactions, behaviors, that in turn determine my experience. And to conclude, or going toward the conclusion, problematizing our position is crucial to question how much of what we grasp it depends on us and how much not. Of course, this is not simple, never clearly defined, but it helps. It helps us to observe the relativity of our own single point of view. And I think that only if we truly consider this relativity of our point of view, we became able to see the co-presence of other conditions, other positions, and other points of view that would otherwise be invisible to us. This is the basis to recognize the other points of view. So this movement from the object of study to the subject who studies to the subjects we work with, so from outside to inside and back to outside again, is the basis for the inclusiveness of research. A fundamental, though not sufficient, condition.
So to conclude, we believe that urban studies sit at the intersection of technical disciplines, where objective and quantitative data are crucial, and humanistic fields that value subjective and qualitative insights. So we would like to ask you if you could summarize all the thoughts that you provided in this interview. How do you see these two needs, being objective on one hand, and considering subjective, humanistic, and embodied perspectives on the other? How do you see these two needs fitting into your understanding of observing urban spaces?
Okay. As I probably already said, I do believe that both perspectives are necessary. I insist on the importance of the embodied perspective in urban studies and in urban design, just because while the importance of the objective and quantitative data is not questioned within the discipline, this is not the case of for subjective data. Indeed, they are considered most of the time unreliable, and in traditional research, subjective data are considered not scientific. Non-scientific. In my experience, I try to consider both dimensions, quantitative and qualitative. I had the opportunity to conduct researches that, let's say, are more about strategies, and so they are quite far from the field. But even in those cases, I don't renounce to the direct and subjective experience from the bottom, let's say, from down below. And I don't think that rigid separations between desk analysis phases and direct analysis are useful. I think these phases can and should be conducted together, influencing to each other, progressively adding information and enriching the research. So again, for me, knowledge is always embodied and embedded, and this concerns also spatial knowledge, which is always a situated experience based on the sensory motor, perceptual and cognitive possibilities of bodies. So without this perspective that we have from these bodies here, we could not be able to get essential information about cities and spaces, their accessibility, inclusiveness, levels of violence, as I told, injustice, the sense of place, the relationship between people and spaces through their uses, their collective memory. We could not identify zones of conflict or of resistance and so on. I just insist on that because the space we study is not only the physical one, the material and the Euclidean one, but it is, first of all, in my opinion, the ordinary spaces included between our bodies, like this hour in between, that this void space that it is full of symbols and meanings and values. This in between that we inhabit, that we experience and share through our bodies, actions and relations. The space we get to know from quantitative methodologies or from the traditional tools, let's say, from cartography, for example, is an outcome of this one I'm talking about, and it is a partial and never neutral representation of the space that I am referring to, the one that we perceive and live every day, the infraordinary and the infrasomatic space. So if we truly admit all that, we'll understand why in our researches we definitely cannot renounce to an embodied experience of the spaces that we investigate.
Urbinary is produced in collaboration with Polyradio and the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies at Politecnico di Milano.